What's up? What's up? I'm Dr. Omatma, host of Egg Meet Sperm, where we're busting fertility myths, sharing tangible tips for your fertility journey, and bringing you the most knowledgeable guests to support your journey to parenthood. This podcast is for both women and men because getting fertile as fuck is for both partners, don't you think? Remember, just listening to this podcast won't get you pregnant, but following the tips we share just may. Let's get you fertile AF so that you can co-create the family you dream of. And if your partner's not listening to this, make sure to share this episode with your partner. Hello and welcome to Egg Meet Sperm. My guest today is Kasey Goins, who is a former physician assistant turned functional nutritionist and women's hormone expert. Through her work, she has helped hundreds of women regulate their cycle, optimize their fertility, banish painful and heavy periods, and take their lives and confidence in their body back. Download her free hormone assessment training on her website at kaseygoins.com/metabolic-assessment. And we will link that in our show notes. Thank you so much for joining me today, Kasey. I am really excited to talk to you about all of the hormones and things that are going on that are causing so many women to struggle with fertility.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. So let's kick it off with like the basics. Estrogen and progesterone. What are they? Where are they? How are they? Let's just get into the foundational stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So I think that and what I want to start out with is I think like the role of estrogen and progesterone can be like very misunderstood. There's a lot of talk about estrogen dominance, which I'm sure we'll touch on today too. But really the role of estrogen and progesterone is to be delicately balanced. There has to be a nice, healthy balance of the two. We don't want them to be like too high, too low, or like any sort of imbalance. That's where symptoms can come from. So estrogen, if we're talking about, especially if we're talking about like fertility, like you're talking about uterine growth, proliferation, we're accommodating like a growing baby essentially and helping maintain the uterine lining, maintaining the placenta if you're pregnant. And so we also see estrogen's effects on the bones and cardiovascular health. So it's really important. It's a really important hormone, especially for women. And I think like growth and proliferation is kind of like the main takeaway for estrogen. Progesterone is like its counterbalance. So progesterone is like this nice, like relaxing, like youthful, calming sort of hormone. This is what's predominating in your luteal phase. So like roughly like the week-ish before your cycle comes, progesterone dominates during that time. And so it's really meant to kind of like counterbalance the effects of estrogen. If we've got too much estrogen, then progesterone is not able to like counter all of those effects. You end up with symptoms of estrogen dominance. But progesterone really is like, a lot of people think about progesterone as being like the pregnancy hormone or like the fertility hormone, but it's really like this anti-aging, anti-stress, like pro-thyroid hormone. And so we absolutely need it for a healthy menstrual cycle, and we need it for just like our well-being overall.
Yeah, yeah. So essentially, like having this balance through the various phases of our cycle, different hormones are prioritized in different parts. And if we don't have the balance, or if we just don't have enough progesterone, we can potentially feel not as great in our bodies.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like this is the thing about like the female body that's just so cool and like so complex and so deep, is that our hormones cycle in roughly like depending on how long your periods are, but roughly like a 28 to 32 day window. And so in the first half of your cycle, you've got estrogen levels climbing, and then those will drop. And then the second half of your cycle, progesterone is rising, and then those levels will drop. And then you have your period. And so there's really like a play of both hormones that are, it's just like such an intricate balance between the two.
Yeah. And sometimes I find like it's so often simplified to like, oh, estrogen dominance.
Yeah.
So let's get into that. Like, what is estrogen dominance and why has it become like such a thing? I feel like
Yeah.
on social media, especially, everyone's like, "Oh, I have estrogen dominance." I'm like, "How do you know? How did you figure this out?"
I
Please
know
tell me
it's
it's not based on your symptoms.
I know it's like it's such a buzzword.
Yeah.
Which I mean, like, I kind of take it twofold. So like one, I'm glad the word is getting out because it's definitely a problem. But on the other hand, like there's more at play than just like, oh, my estrogen's too high, right? So when we talk about estrogen dominance, we're looking at estrogen in relationship to progesterone. So you could have like normal levels of estrogen, but your progesterone is low and still have estrogen dominance. And I think that's
Mhm.
the piece of the puzzle that most women are like, oh, like I thought like I just had high estrogen, but it really could just be a progesterone issue too. And and like I said, like I'm glad the word is getting out, because I think it's something that we really need to pay attention to. Like our bodies produce symptoms as a way of communicating to us, as a way of
Mhm.
telling us like, hey, we're like waving our red flag, like something is going on here. Like, I hate to use car analogies, but it's like the only one I have. So it's like
Mhm.
it's like your check engine light prompting you to look under the hood, and take deeper inventory on like, okay, like what's causing the imbalance, what's driving the imbalance. And that's what we have to look at. So it's not a matter of just like throwing a blanket statement on top of symptoms and saying like, oh, my periods are long and painful and heavy, therefore I have estrogen dominance. And we just walk around telling people that we have estrogen dominance. There's a reason that you have it, right? Like there's a
Mhm.
reason that imbalance exists. And so often in my clients, I'll say like a multitude of different things, but if you want to boil it back down to like one major main root cause, it's like stress on the body. And I know it sounds like so vague because stress can come in a multitude of different forms. But, I mean, you think about just like the world that we live in, many of us are nutrient deficient. We're not getting the minerals that we need. We're using products and, lotions and makeups that are all endocrine disrupting. And so, we're sitting inside all day, we're not getting exposed to sunlight or nature, and like all of these things are necessary for a healthy like balance of hormones. So all of those are going to be different types of stressors on the body. And so when you look at estrogen dominance, the deeper question is, well, why do I have estrogen dominance? And digging back for those root causes and kind of peeling back the layers of the onion, if you will.
Yeah, yeah. And so in your experience, you feel like a lot of it is stress related. Let's talk a little bit about some of those underlying root causes of estrogen imbalance. I don't know, I'm
Yeah.
not going to call it dominance, just imbalance.
I like that. Then you should just like trademark that. Yeah. So I think some of the biggest ones that I see are like nutrient deficiencies and mineral imbalances for my clients particularly. So they'll come in and maybe they've got, just really painful, long, heavy periods. They're like changing a tampon every hour, like they can barely move on their period. And so, when we kind of look at like, okay, like how are you eating and how are you living? The nutrient deficiencies and the mineral deficiencies tend to be like the number one thing that stands out. But I also have a lot of clients that, it stems from gut inflammation. So if there's issues in the gut, if there's dysbiosis, you have a parasite hanging out, like your body is kind of signaling this chronic state of inflammation, and that inflammation is going to just like completely derail everything. So that's a layer to peel back. And then lifestyle stress too. I have a lot of clients they have really stressful jobs. They've been through trauma in their lives, and if those things are not addressed, and you're living in this chronic state of fight or flight, like you're living, like your nervous system is dysregulated and your cortisol is like off the map, then like that's also going to dysregulate your hormones. So if you've got, as cortisol increases, estrogen also increases. And so the more stressed we are, the more estrogen dominant we tend to become.
Hmm. Hmm. And then like the aspect of like liver and how the liver is
Yeah.
functioning in terms of getting rid of estrogen, I'm
Oh my gosh.
assuming.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. That's a huge one. Yeah, there's so many so many factors at play too, but like if your detox pathways aren't open and your liver's like unable to like clear and metabolize that estrogen, it's just going to get recirculated right back through the body.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's a lot of factors in terms of estrogen. How about the progesterone side? So what are some of the things that potentially like tip this towards estrogen rather than progesterone?
Yeah, I think, you know, when we look at like the root causes, I think a lot of it kind of tends to be the same. It just depends on like how your body is responding to it. So, um, I will often see like low progesterone and even low estrogen in like women who've gotten off of birth control. And like they're just having a really hard time getting their hormones back online. Like their HPA axis is just kind of like struggling with that.
Hmm.
I see low progesterone a lot in clients with PCOS who aren't cycling regularly, who aren't ovulating. And then, you know, a lot of clients who are just under stress or like they're, you know, they're not eating enough, they're over exercising. All of those components of life
Hmm.
will definitely impair progesterone too. So it's not necessarily, I feel like everybody is just a little bit different in how their body is going to respond to the stress.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. In terms of like progesterone, I'm curious um if you've ever seen like too much progesterone.
I have not. I have yet to
Yeah.
see a case where there's too much progesterone.
Yeah, me too. And but I do think that there are those like borderline cases where someone might just not have enough estrogen during the luteal phase, and that equally is going to imbalance the body. And often they'll feel more tired or like, oh my God, I like so sleepy when I'm in my luteal phase is often like that again, that imbalance flipped to the other side.
Yeah, yeah, that's very true too. I don't see it a ton, but for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Um, so let's talk about the context of this, like the hormone imbalances and how they potentially relate to fertility issues. Um,
Yeah.
yeah. That's why everyone's
Yeah.
here. So,
Like loaded question.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so the biggest factor I think that I see at play with fertility struggles is like, you know, so either like there's like a lack of ovulation, like you're anovulatory, low progesterone, like you're just not able to like hold on to, you know, a fertilized egg essentially. Um, Estrogen dominance can also impair it, and I feel like it can also make pregnancy a little bit more challenging and more difficult. But I think by far the most common thing that I see is like progesterone is low. I also see a lot of like gut stress, liver stress, lifestyle stress with fertility challenges, lots of nutrient deficiencies, lots of mineral deficiencies. And if we can correct some of those things and like, you know, kind of like spark progesterone back up a little bit, like that you've got what you need to be able, like you're ovulating, you're making progesterone, like that's essentially what we need.
Yeah, absolutely. How, in terms of your practice, since you do come from like the physician assistant background, like
Mhm.
how do you feel about um like estrogen and progesterone replacement?
You know, I'm
I know
not
I like to get into
you know,
it.
I think in certain situations I'm not opposed to it. I think that there can for sure be cases where like, you know, progesterone if needed during like the first like trimester of pregnancy can be really beneficial if someone's like at risk for miscarrying. You know, and then like the perimenopausal, menopausal years, like I don't think HRT, like I'm not against it. But I think that I think there's a lot that we can do to like optimize the body before you have to get to that point.
Hallelujah. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for saying that. Cool. So, in terms of like what people can do to kind of optimize estrogen and progesterone balance and just overall like support fertility, what can we start with?
I think some of just like the basic foundational things, because if you try to overwhelm yourself with like doing a complete like 180 flip on like your nutrition or your lifestyle, like it's going to feel overwhelming, and it's going to feel like this is too challenging. So typically like the very basic things I'll start with is like, are you eating breakfast in the morning? Like, can we at least just get you some regular meals throughout the day? Carbs are really necessary to support progesterone too. So like in women on like low carb or keto diets, that are not getting an adequate carbohydrate intake, like I often will see progesterone kind of struggle in those situations too. So carbs are really necessary. And then good blood sugar balance, I feel like, is one that, again, I feel like maybe this has become like a little bit of a buzzword
Mhm.
on social media, which is a good thing. But like just pairing your proteins and carbs together can be just, like a really simple thing that you can do when you're in your kitchen and you're just like, okay, I'm about to make something. Do I have protein with this meal? Do I have carbs with this meal? Do I have some fiber with this meal? Like just a really well balanced plate. And a lot of times like those basic things are just like enough to start moving the needle forward in that case.
Mhm.
Like, of course, we can dig deeper and do functional lab testing and like, dive deeper into like, okay, is there stuff hanging out in the gut, and we can get you on minerals and supplements to support your liver and like all these things too. But like the at the end of the day, like I always come back to the basics. Like, are you meeting the basics?
Mhm. Yeah, and I like what you just said about the carbs supporting progesterone production, because I think that there is this tendency, especially what I see in the fertility world, is like people are like, "Oh, I did this detox," or "I switched my diet to keto, paleo," and it's like our society is really not in favor of carbs. It's
Yeah.
really weird to me. I'm like, you guys, it's a major food group.
I know.
Like, even
I
if you don't eat grains, you don't eat processed carbs, you can still eat carbs. Like, eat
Yes.
a baked sweet potato. Like,
Right.
right?
I know. I think there's, I almost feel like a lot of it was perpetuated by like obviously diet culture, but also like the fitness industry kind
Hmm.
of coming on board in the last decade or so. And like actually more than that, I'm dating myself, but like where that was really big. And there's still a lot of physicians, a lot of people in the modern medicine world, a lot of practitioners that are pushing like low carb keto diets as a means to, especially things like PCOS or infertility. And I'm like, I don't understand what the obsession is with like a low or zero carb diet. Like when you look at physiologically like how the body works, like we need carbs to support progesterone and thyroid hormone.
Hmm.
um, and so if you're, if your thyroid's struggling and you're not making progesterone, like sometimes we can just increase your carb intake, and like, that can be enough to be a needle mover itself.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. I feel like I, we tell people to eat a certain amount of carbs every day, but
Mhm.
to do it in a way that's like not processed, right? Like
Yes,
we're not saying like go out and eat a bowl of pasta. Like that's not gonna, it may help, but it won't be sustainably helping. Um, so really like getting those unprocessed, wholesome carb, complex carbohydrates into the
hmm,
diet can be such a significant portion of helping support hormone balance, and honestly like probably helping to a certain extent support our ability to um feel nourished,
yeah,
and that's going to give a level of safety and security in our bodies that then makes it safe for you to have a baby, right?
absolutely.
So yeah, I think, yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like, so like two things, like going back to like the carb conversation is like, like I loved when you had said like we don't just want you to like eat a bowl of pasta. Like my mind went to Pop Tarts, but but like, you know, but like the point is to get you carbohydrates, but also get you nutrients and minerals
Mhm.
within that too.
Mhm.
And so, there's there's a lot of talk about like macronutrients. So you're talking about protein, carb, and fat, but then not a lot of people are talking about the micronutrients. Like, am I getting potassium from this? Am I getting calcium from this? Am I getting preformed vitamin A from this? And so um, those are facets to look at too, is like the micronutrient profile.
Mm-hmm.
And I also loved what you said about creating safety in the body too. Like, that's like your body's number one goal. At the end of the day, your body does not care about anything else except like surviving and being safe. And so
Yeah.
if we're loading ourselves with all of these stressors, if we're like like restricting our diet unnecessarily, and we're pulling carbs out, and we're over exercising, and we're exposing ourselves to blue light, and we're staying up until 1 a.m, like all of these things are going to stress the system so much that your body doesn't feel safe enough. Like, it doesn't, like, there's not that mechanism of like safety. And if we don't have safety, like, why would your body care about reproduction if it doesn't feel safe? Like, that's not a vital like survival mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
So that's like, at the end of the day, like, your body needs to feel safe. And so anything that we can do to create that semblance of safety, whether it's eating enough, getting outside, like reducing your stress and overall life, then you're like setting yourself up for success down the road.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely agree. And I think to that point, it's like if you are not feeling safe, and this is like maybe we don't phrase it or we don't hear about this conversation in this frame very often, but if the body is not in a state of quote unquote relaxation,
Mhm.
um, then it's really hard to allow it to reproduce, right?
Mhm.
It's like if my internal experience is I have to be on alert, or my blood sugar is so dysregulated that my internal system is essentially like wigging out and is
Yeah.
trying to figure out like, is there enough food? Am I going to survive?
Yeah.
Then it's really hard in that place to think about like, oh yeah, I want to make a baby.
Right, right, exactly. Like, your body doesn't know the difference between like your blood sugar being dysregulated and you staying up until 2 in the morning, and hitting all the red lights on the way to work. It doesn't know the difference between that and like, running from a tiger. Like, it's the same stress hormones that increase in both of those situations, because your
Yeah.
body goes into like, this is a threat, this is dangerous, this is like not optimizing my safety, and so we are just going to like signal all the stress hormones.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's like really easy to think about safety in the context of like, oh, I'm running from a tiger. Like I'm obviously not safe.
Yeah.
But I like this example of like running the red lights because like here I am like rushing to work because whatever reason I didn't get enough sleep. I couldn't wake up in the morning. I was exhausted. Like all of those things, like something as simple as like needing to fly to work or being stuck in traffic or whatever, like all of those things are going to make it that much more stressful to be able to quote unquote relax. And I always put that in quotes because I feel like relax has a twist to it, but
It does.
I don't particularly like love that word, but in this context, it's really that like internal sense of safety or being able to think about something besides running from the
Mhm.
tiger in the jungle.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, and all of these things that that we can start to like onboard, whether it's like a more nutrient dense diet or stabilizing your blood sugar, like, we're calming down those stress hormones, and we're helping put your body back into a parasympathetic, like, rest and digest state. And that's the state that we reproduce in.
Mm-hmm. Yep,
So.
absolutely. Absolutely. So good. Do you want to share, like before we close out today, anything that you want to share in terms of what we're talking about as far as fertility, hormone imbalances, things that people could benefit from if they are struggling with fertility?
Oh, yeah, like, yeah, there's like so many things coming up to me right now. I think the biggest one is like realizing and like it almost like having like the mindset belief that like your body is not broken. Like there's nothing broken about you. And I think often like we get into, we get into fertility challenges or hormonal imbalances, and we all of a sudden have this blanket fear that like something is wrong with me, like
Mm-hmm.
something is wrong with my body. And I was actually talking to a client a couple of weeks ago, and she was like, I don't, she had PCOS, and she was like, I finally don't feel like my PCOS like defines who I am as a person. And so I always like to end with just like knowing that there's so much hope, and knowing that
Yes.
there's like so many layers deeper that we can start digging to peel back those root causes. So that you can feel like your body is like essentially working for you. But at the end of the day, like you are not broken. And so I would like just carry that with you, like wherever you go. I think that mindset shift is going to be really, really important, because the more that we're telling ourselves like something is wrong with me, things are broken, the more that our body is going to perceive those things and feel stressed because of it. And so the mindset aspect is also really important.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so good. And I love what you said. Like there is so much hope and so much like we have the ability to get out of this like fight or flight into the rest and digest parasympathetic quote unquote relax mode.
Yes, absolutely.
And just like the little steps, the little shifts that we've talked about today, like all of those mindset or like deeper underlying things are actually easy ways to support your body to have better hormonal balance.
For sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes it's the smallest things that can make like the biggest difference.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. Where is the best place for people to find you and get in touch?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm like a sucker for Instagram. So that's probably the best place to connect with me. So my handle on Instagram is at Kasey.Goins. We also have, I think you mentioned it earlier too, but there's a free metabolic assessment checklist and video training up on my website, which is just KaseyGoins.com. So that's like one of like my underlying principles is that like if the metabolism is stressed out, like if your cells are stressed, then your hormones are also going to be stressed. And so having that as kind of like a tool, like an assessment tool to see like, okay, like what's my metabolic health, like what are my cells doing, can be really, really helpful for like getting your hormones balanced in the long run. But yeah, that's me.
Love it. Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you listening in, thank you for being here. And I can't wait to hear all of your amazing tips that I know are coming for the rest of the week. So thanks for being with us, Kasey.
Thank you so much for having me.
Was that an amazing episode or what? Make sure to check our show notes so that you can link up with our guests. And if you're not a part of our secret Fertile AF community, you can join for free via the link in our show notes. Last but not least, have you showed us some love lately? It would mean the world to us if you could share and review our podcast. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time on Egg Meets Sperm. Peace.